12 years ago, the owners of this garden began adding their native plant obsession. From the verge right through to the backyard, the property is now filled with mostly Australian native plants. I'm Chloe from Been There Dug That. Let's go behind the garden gate. Welcome to Glen Iris, an inner eastern suburb of Melbourne. 12 years ago, when the owners bought this property, this front yard was mostly driveway. Where I am standing now and this garden bed was all dedicated to car parks. So what the owners did is got rid of all of that and put in some garden beds for some much needed plants. Straight away, we're invited to explore the garden by the curving paths and the narrow spaces that we can't quite see where they lead to. So we want to come in and explore further. Now, there was only 3 trees in the original garden that they decided to keep, and this crepe myrtle is one of them. It's actually lost a few branches on this side here in the last couple of weeks, which have meant that this area of the garden now feels a bit weird and wonky. But as you can see, it's starting to send up some new shoots, so it will fill in. And it's such a beautiful tree in its own right. And how majestic is this big acacia, which really dominates the front yard, but also offers some privacy from the street. There's another one of these replicated in the backyard, and you'll see it's just as beautiful back there. Now, something that's not so beautiful out here is this dead isopogon. And Debbie, the owner, tells me that this actually only died in the last few days. I suspect it might be because of our very wet and kind of odd summer this year, but it could also be suffering from the extra sun exposure because of the lost branches on the crepe myrtle over here. Who knows? It's a 12-year-old isopogon, so maybe it had just had its life. I like that this garden has plenty of seating spaces as well. Now, you might be thinking that Debbie's missed a few weeds because you can spot a few of these little plants through the gravel paths, but these are actually native bulbine lilies. I have them growing at my place and they have the sweetest little yellow flowers. The tubers are actually also edible and they're a popular bush tucker food. Debbie hasn't planted these have just popped up. And weirdly enough, she says even if she plants them in the garden, they just emerge here in the footpath. And I love that she's just left them there. So if you look closely, you can see the stump of the 2 trees that they've had removed. There's one here and there's one back here as well. So to replace that height that is now gone, Debbie's added these 2 myoporums. And this one here is the floribundum and this one here is the battier. But these will grow up to about 2.5 to 3 metres tall, so they'll really fill in this space nicely. And their drooping, gentle foliage is perfect for small birds to hide in. This one here is covered in almost a snow covering of white flowers, and this one has pretty mauve pinkish flowers, which will actually work really nicely with the crepe myrtle. Now, underneath there is a lovely mix of ground covers and different little plants to fill in the space, as well as some pandarina vines along the fence line. How majestic is this Banksia? This is Mini Marg and one of Debbie's passions. Now, Debbie is a plant nerd at heart, and there's a huge range and a great mix of sometimes very rare Australian native plants in this garden. But she needed help to start with from a professional. So she called in Bev Hansen, who designed the garden for her. She created the garden spaces, and in came the construction team to do all the groundwork. And once construction was completed, Debbie was able to release her creative juices and fill the space with plants. Now, there's some in here that I have never seen before. This is the fine leaf form of the hop bush plant, and its really delicate fine leaves are again a perfect habitat for small birds to hide in, and it's just such a really pretty plant. And come and check out this Darwinia down here. It might not look like much now, it's hiding under this great big flowering gum, but the foliage, when you smell it, it actually smells like bubblegum. She wasn't joking. And how beautiful is this flowering gum up above? The bees are going bonkers for it. Now, although this is in flower now and there are plants in the garden that flower at different times of the year, you'll notice that there isn't flowers everywhere. And that's because Debbie is actually most passionate about foliage colour, contrast and form. So keep your eyes out for the variations in foliage, texture and contrast as we move throughout the garden. How beautiful are these Silver Princess? They're one of my favourite trees. Now these Silver Princess have a bit of a story to tell. So often you see Silver Princesses growing as a single trunked tree and they can get quite top heavy and fall over in storms. There's 3 trees planted in here and that's exactly what happened to one of them. About 6 years ago, the main tree, the biggest tree, its central leader fell over and broke in a storm. So rather than replacing it or pulling them all out because the numbers now looked odd, Debbie chose to coppice them all. And this means chopping them all right back down to their ground lignotuber. And what this does, it encourages multiple stems or multiple trunks to form. So you almost get like a shrub-like appearance, but you still get the beautiful, majestic tree-like appearance at the top here. And as you can see, they work perfectly. And actually, another hint with Silver Princesses, you can see in here that there's a few rocks tucked in around their roots. The Silver Princess likes to have its roots kept cold. So by placing some large rocks around them, these rocks will help to insulate those roots so they never get too hot. It's a handy hint if you struggle with them. This Grevillea Superb is, well, superb. It's huge, it's giving some lovely protection from the window behind, and it means that if you're sitting indoors, you can also enjoy its flowers. With flowers for nearly 11 months of the year, it's very popular with the local lorikeets. Well, let's go through the garage and explore the backyard. How's that for a view? It's a really private little paradise back here. This entertainer space right off the kitchen and dining area, and then a path that invites us around. Straight away, I am drawn to come out to investigate this pond. I can hear the water and I can see the very happy fish down here as well. This is a lovely quiet space, and being so close to the house and the entertaining area here, it means that the water sounds really fill the space nicely. You'll see that the Acacia limelight is a mirror copy of the one in the front yard, and I love how they've left this quirky eucalyptus branch to suspend over the top of the pond. Although apparently the heron does like to sit up there and try fishing from time to time. This is really beautifully done, how the sides of the pond are completely softened with plants. And in here, if you look really closely, I can see the remains of a tree fern trunk. Debbie tells me she split the trunk in half and lay it on the ground, curved side up, and then just let nature do its own thing. Various ferns and plants have actually taken over that tree fern stump, and now they soften the edge of the pond beautifully. You might notice this huge ash tree, which is actually on the neighbour's property. And this can cause a little bit of a headache for Debbie, because when it drops its seeds, this area becomes a sea of the tiny little ash tree seedlings. So one day when the owners of the next door garden do eventually remove this, it'll open things up a little bit for Debbie and give her the excuse to plant some more big trees across this back fence line. Hello, hello. Yeah, come on, let's go, let's go. Debbie calls Jessie here her little wombat because Jessie loves barreling around the garden and creating little paths that she runs around on. So you will notice spots where Debbie just can't get plants to grow because that is Jessie's footpath and her walking track. These great big casuarinas were a necessity because when they moved in initially, this big 2-storey development behind just towered over the whole backyard. So these nearly 12-year-old casuarinas provide the privacy that they need, and they give some much needed shade to this back corner of the garden as well. A lovely native hibiscus that's even in bloom for us. And what do you know? A lamppost in the wood. I feel like I've gone to Narnia. This is another lovely seating area in the garden with another one of these beautiful flowering gums above us. And this sweet little bird bath is just gorgeous. Now you might notice that on the floor and underneath the plants in the garden, you can see a lot of logs and sticks and twigs deliberately placed by Debbie, partly to stop Jess from digging things up and barreling things over as she runs around the backyard, but also as a natural compost and a natural nutrient supply for the plants around. Debbie doesn't do much fertilising in the garden, so the twigs and the fallen leaves offer this nutrients to the plants. I love the silver foliage of this eucalypt. This is Eucalypt latans moonlight, and this silver foliage is actually the juvenile foliage. If you look closely up the top here, the mature foliage is a green colour and much more of an elongated leaf. But Debbie wants to grow this for this juvenile foliage. So what she does is she lops off the top of it to keep it in that juvenile foliage stage. And it's just beautiful. It'd be a great one to add to cut flower vases. This creeper has gone bonkers, and part of that is because it's one of the 2 vines that Debbie's discovered that the possums don't eat. This is the Hibbertia, and the other that she's discovered they don't eat is the Pandarina. Now down here is a very narrow little garden bed that leads us to things like the compost and the clothesline. We won't head down there, but of course, being this garden, Debbie has it beautifully planted. Come and have a look. These standard grevilleas are a fun way of adding some height to the garden with pretty flowers that are filled with bees, but it also gives you planting space underneath. So of course, you can fit more things in. These acacias here in this garden, particularly with the pond in front of it, it does have a very weeping willow aspect to it. Now the unfortunate thing about these and all acacias is that they're relatively short-lived. About 10 to 12 years is the maximum for most of them. And this one, well, it's nearing its peak, but Debbie has been keeping it in check and keeping it compact by trimming any of the branches that get a little bit too leggy. And it seems to be working, but in the next few years, who knows? Here is a very spiky plant growing in a pot. This is a native citrus. It's a finger lime, and if you look at the fruit, they're very elongated, and when mature, they're a really dark brown colour. So let's pick one and have a look inside. And it bursts open with all these beautiful little caviar pearls inside. And they are so zingy and zesty. Perfect in a G&T, on fish dishes, or even just on a salad. When Debbie was asked by Bev what sort of a garden she wanted, she said, well, I just want a space that I can sit down and enjoy a cup of tea in. No lawn, no straight edges, and a pond that I can hear from the house. And well, it's exactly what they've got. And this covered space here, you can see there's lots and lots of hanging baskets, some of which contain plants that we typically see as indoor plants. So it's a real little microclimate in this space. And over here there are 2 wollamais in pots. Debbie actually had 2 bigger wollamais in these pots, but they'd grown so big that they'd reached the roof. So she's donated them to a local nursery and replaced them with baby wollamais, which I'm sure again will reach the roof, and she can do the same process all over again. Over the last 12 years, as Debbie has grown this garden, she's really enjoyed particularly working on the front yard space and meeting passers-by to chat all things plants. And I think you'll agree what she's created is a really lovely, enjoyable garden that's low maintenance and easy to care for. I hope you've enjoyed looking around with me. Please make sure you like and subscribe, because I've got plenty more garden tours coming your way. See you next time.